On a gray afternoon when the rain came down in sheets, a single mother named Naima Wells was hurrying to catch her bus when she saw an old woman standing soaked to the bone at the stop. No umbrella, shivering. The rain running off her like she was a statue in a fountain. And Naima, who had exactly one umbrella and a long, wet walk still ahead of her, did not even slow down to think about it. She walked over and held her umbrella out over the old woman and said, "Here now, you'll catch your death." And she stood there in the downpour getting soaked to her own skin, sheltering a stranger, until the bus came. And then she folded the umbrella and pressed it into the old woman's hands and said, "Keep it," and ran off into the rain to catch her own bus, soaked through, because that is simply who Naima Wells was. She did not know who the old woman was. She had no idea, because the soaked old woman standing at that bus stop was Eugenia Talbot, and Eugenia Talbot was the founder and the head of the most respected school in the city, the school Naima Wells had begged and prayed and poured her whole heart into getting her twins into, the school that, 2 weeks before, had sent Naima a letter denying them. Naima had just given her umbrella, in the rain, with no idea at all, to the one woman in the world with the power to change her children's entire future. Stay with me, all the way to the end, because what Eugenia Talbot did when she found out who that young woman was is the whole reason I am telling you this story. And before we begin, do me one kindness and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It always means more than you know. It had been a hard 2 weeks for Naima Wells, the kind of 2 weeks that test what a person is made of, and the rain that afternoon felt almost personal, one more thing piling on. She was 31 years old, and she was raising 6-year-old twins by herself, a boy named Jalen and a girl named Zuri, in a small apartment in a hard part of Washington. And she did it on the wages of a teacher's aide, which is to say on almost nothing, because a paraprofessional in an underfunded public school is paid like the work does not matter, even though the work is the work of holding children's whole futures in your hands. Naima loved that work. She loved those kids, the ones in her classroom who came in hungry and scared and behind, and she gave them everything she had. But she went home every night to her own 2 children, and she knew, because she saw it up close all day long, exactly what kind of education the neighborhood was able to offer them. And it broke her heart, because Jalen and Zuri were so bright, so quick, so full of the particular blazing promise that every parent sees in their child, but that in their case happened to be really truly there, and Naima Wells was determined, with everything in her, that her twins were going to get a real shot at the future their gifts deserved. You should have seen those 2. Jalen was the quiet one, the watcher, a boy who took a thing apart in his head before he ever touched it, who asked questions at 6 that made grown adults pause. And Zuri was the fire, quick and fierce and funny, already reading 2 grades ahead, already arguing with the television, and winning. Naima would lie awake some nights doing the math of their future, the terrible math every poor parent of a gifted child knows, the math that says the world will waste this if I do not fight. And she had decided, somewhere in those sleepless hours, that she was not going to let the neighborhood decide what her children became. She knew what the neighborhood school could offer, because she worked in one just like it, 40 children to a room and not enough of anything, teachers heroic and exhausted and drowning. She loved that school and the children in it, and she would not send her own twins into it to be one more bright light slowly dimmed for lack of fuel. She wanted more for them. Not because the local kids did not deserve more too. They did. All of them did. That was the whole tragedy. But because Jalen and Zuri were hers, and a mother fights for the ones who are hers, and Naima Wells was going to fight. That was why she had applied to Talbot. Talbot Preparatory Academy was the best school in the city, a legendary place, founded decades before by a legendary woman. And it was the kind of school that changed the trajectory of a child's entire life. The kind of school whose graduates went to the best colleges and came back to run things, and it offered, on paper, financial aid, scholarships, a way in for families like Naima's. So Naima had poured herself into that application, the way you pour yourself into the one slim hope you are allowing yourself to have. She had filled out every form. She had written the essays. She had taken the twins to the assessments and the interviews, scraping together the day off work and the bus fare. And she had let herself hope, against all her own hard-won caution, because the twins had done beautifully, because everyone who met them lit up, because surely, a school built to find exactly this kind of overlooked promise would see it. She had not let herself want anything in a long time. Wanting was a luxury, and Naima had trained herself out of it the way you train yourself out of any expensive habit, because hope that goes unmet is its own kind of hunger, and she had been hungry enough. But she had let herself want this. She had stayed up past midnight after the twins were down, filling out the forms in her careful hand, looking up every word she did not know, writing and rewriting the parent essay until it said what she actually meant, which was, "Please, these children are everything. Please see them." She had spent money she did not have on the application fee and the bus fare to the assessments. 2 long trips across the city. The twins in their best clothes. Jalen solemn and Zuri practically vibrating, and she had watched through a glass partition as her babies charmed and dazzled the very people who held the door. And she had let herself believe, on the bus ride home with a child asleep on each shoulder, that maybe, this once, the world was going to be fair to them. It is a dangerous thing, hope, for people who cannot afford it. Naima had spent her caution like savings on this one bet. And she had lost. And then the letter had come. "We regret to inform you. After careful consideration, we received many more qualified applicants than we have spaces for. We wish your children every success." The polite, smooth, devastating language of the no, and Naima Wells had sat at her kitchen table with that letter and felt a door she had let herself believe in close, quietly, in her face. She did not cry, not right away, because crying was another luxury, and the twins were in the next room. She read the letter twice, and then a third time, looking for the loophole, the appeal, the number to call, the way the desperate read a thing that has just ruined them. And there was none. Only the smooth final courtesy of it. After careful consideration. She thought about the careful consideration, about who exactly had considered her children, and how carefully, and she felt the old familiar thing rise up. The thing every poor parent knows. The suspicion that the consideration had never really been about her children at all, that the verdict had been written before the twins ever walked in a language of advantages they did not happen to have. That night, after the twins were asleep, she called her mother. Marcella came over, the way Marcella always came, and the 2 women sat at the kitchen table with the letter between them. And Naima finally let herself cry, quietly, so the children would not hear. And her mother held her hand and let her, and did not say any of the useless things, did not say it's for the best or everything happens for a reason, just held her daughter's hand and let her grieve the door. Because Marcella Wells had spent her own life watching doors close on people she loved, and she knew the only honest thing to do with that grief was to feel it. And then, when Naima was done, Marcella said the only true thing there was to say, which was, "Those babies are going to be somebody no matter what any school says, because I have seen them, and I know." And Naima believed her, mostly, which is all the believing a tired heart can manage. If a story about a mother fighting for her children's future against a world that keeps closing doors is the reason you're here, then make sure you're subscribed, because what happened to that door is the entire reason this story exists. So that was the 2 weeks Naima Wells was having when she stood soaking a stranger's shoulders in the rain. And I want you to understand something about the umbrella, because it is the hinge of everything. Naima had every reason that afternoon to keep her umbrella for herself. She was tired and broke and freshly heartbroken, and she had a long way to go in a hard rain, and nobody on this earth would have blamed a struggling single mother for staying dry. But Naima Wells did not have it in her to walk past a soaked old woman shivering at a bus stop, and the reason she did not have it in her was her own mother, Marcella, who had raised Naima on one unshakable rule, repeated so many times it had become part of Naima's spine. "It's not kindness, baby," Marcella used to say, "if you only do it for people who can do something for you. That's not kindness, that's just trading. Real kindness is what you do for the ones who can't pay you back, the stranger, the one who's got nothing to offer you, because that's the only kind that counts." And Naima had lived by that her whole life, had given when she had nothing to give, had helped when it cost her, not because it ever got her anything, but because her mother had taught her that the whole point was that it didn't. So when she saw the old woman in the rain, there was again nothing really to decide. She gave her the umbrella. And she gave it, the rule made sure, with absolutely no idea that the soaked old stranger was anyone at all, let alone the one person alive who could open the door that had just closed on her children. And here is the thing you have to hold on to, the thing that makes what happened next almost unbearable in its beauty. Naima did not stop to weigh it. There was no calculation, no moment where she thought about her own wet walk or her own hard day or the unfairness of being asked to be generous when she had just been treated so ungenerously by the world. Her mother's rule did not come with exceptions for hard days. It's not kindness if you only do it when it's easy, and only for people who can pay you back, Marcella had said. In 10 different ways, across 30 years, the test of it is the day you've got nothing left and you give anyway. And Naima, who on that particular gray afternoon had just about nothing left, gave anyway. Gave her umbrella to a shivering stranger and got soaked to the bone for it, and ran off into the rain without so much as catching the woman's name, because catching the name was not the point. The name had never been the point. The whole point was that you do it for the nameless ones, the ones who can do nothing for you, the ones you will never see again. That was the kindness Naima Wells gave that day, the purest kind there is, the kind given in total ignorance of any possible reward. Which is exactly why what it set in motion is so hard to bear. Naima got home that evening, soaked to the skin, her braids dripping, her one good coat ruined for the night. And Marcella took one look at her and started fussing. "Where is your umbrella, girl? You'll catch pneumonia." And Naima just laughed, tired, and said she gave it to an old lady at the bus stop who needed it worse. And Marcella stopped fussing and looked at her daughter for a long moment. This daughter she had raised on the rule. And something soft and proud moved across the older woman's face, and she said only, "Well, good, that's right." And she got Naima a towel and put the kettle on, and the twins came running to hang on their soaked mother's legs. And the 4 of them, the grandmother and the mother and the 2 bright children, had their small supper in the warm little kitchen while the rain came down outside, and not one of them had the slightest idea that the soaked old stranger from the bus stop was at that very moment riding home across the city, unable to stop thinking about the young woman who had given her an umbrella, or that the whole course of their lives had just, quietly, in the rain, begun to turn. Now I have to tell you about that old woman. Because Eugenia Talbot was not an ordinary soul standing in the rain. She was 80 years old, near enough, and she was one of the most respected people in that entire city, and the reason she was standing soaked, an umbrella less at a public bus stop, when she could have summoned a car with a phone call, was a small, private rebellion she allowed herself now and then. Eugenia Talbot had come from absolutely nothing, and she had never fully made peace with how far she'd risen from it, and every so often, when the galas and the boards and the deference got to be too much, she would slip away from all of it and ride the public bus across the city she'd grown up poor in, just to remember, just to be among ordinary people again, just to feel like the girl she had been before she became the institution she was. That afternoon, the rain had caught her out, and she had been standing there getting drenched. An old woman nobody recognized without her trappings, and a young woman with one umbrella and the look of someone having a hard time of it, had stopped and sheltered her and given the umbrella away and run off into the storm, and Eugenia Talbot had stood there holding a stranger's umbrella, deeply moved, because she had spent 50 years among the powerful and the polished, and genuine unbought kindness had become, to her sorrow, the rarest thing she ever encountered. You have to understand what it does to a person. 50 years of being important. Everyone Eugenia Talbot met wanted something from her. A recommendation, a donation, a place for their child. A moment of her reflected light, and they were all so polished about it, so practiced, that she had not received a truly disinterested kindness in longer than she could remember, the kind with nothing behind it, the kind a person gives because giving is simply who they are. The powerful live inside a hall of mirrors that reflects their power back at them in everyone's face. And it is the loneliest place on earth. And Eugenia knew it was making her into someone she did not like, someone hard and suspicious and tired. That was why she rode the bus. Not as charity, not as theater, but as medicine, a way to be for an hour, just an old woman among other ordinary people who did not know her name and wanted nothing from her. And on the afternoon a soaked young stranger sheltered her and gave away an umbrella and vanished into the rain, wanting nothing at all. Eugenia Talbot had received, without either of them knowing it, the exact medicine she had been riding the bus for years to find, and it went straight to the part of her that had been starving for it. And it would not let her rest until she had found out who that young woman was. Because here is the thing about Eugenia Talbot, the thing that makes this whole story ache. She had built her entire life, her entire legendary institution, on exactly the kind of grace that young woman had just shown her, and somewhere along the way she had lost track of it. Eugenia Talbot had been, 80 years ago, a poor black girl in a poor black neighborhood, brilliant, hungry to learn, and the world she was born into had every intention of turning her away. She had been denied again and again the education her mind cried out for, told in 100 ways that school was not for girls like her, that she should set her sights lower, that the door was closed. And she would have been lost, that blazing mind would have been wasted the way so many were and are, except for one person. A teacher named Miss Lillian, who saw the poor girl with the hungry eyes and refused, simply refused, to let her be turned away. Miss Lillian fought for her. Miss Lillian found her the books and the chances and the scholarship, and stood between Eugenia and every door that tried to close, and said, over and over, "This child belongs, and I will not let you turn her away for what she cannot help." And on the strength of one teacher's refusal, Eugenia Talbot had risen, all the way up, to become one of the great educators of her generation. And she had founded a school. She had founded Talbot Preparatory with one burning purpose, written into its very charter, a motto she had said at every graduation for 40 years, "No child who belongs here gets turned away for what they can't help." She had built the whole thing to be, for 10,000 poor, brilliant children, what Miss Lillian had been for her. She could still hear Miss Lillian's voice after all these years. She could still see the woman, the only adult in young Eugenia's whole hard childhood who had looked at the poor hungry girl and seen not a problem to be managed, but a mind to be saved. The schools had wanted to put Eugenia where poor black girls went, which was nowhere, which was out, and Miss Lillian had stood in doorways and offices and would not move, had spent her own small salary on Eugenia's books, had sat with her after hours, had marched her into places that did not want her, and dared them to turn the child away while she stood there watching. This child belongs, Miss Lillian had said, again and again, in rooms full of people who had already decided otherwise, and you will not turn her away for what she cannot help, for the money she wasn't born with, for the home she didn't choose. Eugenia had built her entire life on the back of that one woman's refusal to let the world have its way. And when she had finally risen high enough to build something of her own, she had built a school, and she had bound her own name to it not out of vanity, but because she wanted that name tied forever to a place that would do, at scale, for thousands, what one teacher had done for one girl. She had meant it to be Miss Lillian, made into a building. That was the whole point of Talbot Preparatory. That was the entire reason it existed. And she had let it forget. If your heart is aching, that's the story working, and this is the moment to subscribe. Because what Eugenia Talbot discovered about her own school is everything I am trying to say. But that had been 40 years ago. And institutions, even the most nobly founded, drift. They grow, and they get prestigious, and the prestige becomes a thing to protect, and the protecting slowly, imperceptibly, becomes the point. Over the decades, Talbot Preparatory had become exactly the kind of place its founder had built it to defy. It had become competitive and expensive and obsessed with its rankings and its college lists and the test scores that fed them. Its admissions process had become a gauntlet that quietly, without anyone ever intending it, filtered for exactly the children who needed it least, the polished, the prepped, the already advantaged, and filtered out exactly the children Eugenia had built it for, the rough diamonds, the poor and brilliant and overlooked, the Naimas and the Jalens and the Zuris. And Eugenia Talbot, old now, revered, sitting at the top of the institution she had created, had let it happen, partly because she had grown old and tired and had handed the day-to-day to others, and partly because of the most human failing of all, which is that it is very, very hard to see clearly the ways your own life's work has betrayed the thing it was built for. She still gave the speech. She still said the motto, "No child who belongs here gets turned away for what they can't help." She had simply stopped knowing whether it was still true, and it was not. 2 weeks before she stood soaked at that bus stop, her own school, in her own name, had turned away a pair of brilliant 6-year-old twins because their mother was a teacher's aide who could not game a system built to be gamed, and Eugenia Talbot had never heard their names, and would not have, ever, except for an umbrella in the rain. Nobody had ever decided to betray the mission. That is the thing about how these betrayals actually happen. Slowly, with good intentions, nobody in the room ever saying out loud, "Let us keep out the poor children we were built to serve." Instead, 1,000 small, reasonable decisions, each defensible on its own, had stacked up over 40 years into a wall. A more rigorous assessment to maintain standards, a tuition increase to attract the best faculty, a more selective process to protect the school's reputation, which protected the value of its degree, which protected the families already inside it. An admissions office that learned, without anyone ever instructing it, to prefer the applications that came pre-polished, because polished applications were easier and safer, and made the numbers look good. Each step had a sensible memo behind it. And the sum of all those sensible memos was a machine that did the precise opposite of what Eugenia Talbot had bled to build. A machine that found the advantaged and called them deserving, and turned the overlooked away and called it standards, all under a motto about turning no one away, recited every June by a founder who had stopped, somewhere along the line, looking closely enough to notice that the words had become a lie. This is how good things die. Not in one betrayal, but in 1,000 reasonable compromises, each one too small to fight about, until one day the thing you built to be a door has quietly become a wall. And it takes something from outside, a shock, a grace, an umbrella in the rain to make you finally see it. That is what Naima's kindness set in motion. Because Eugenia Talbot could not stop thinking about the young woman at the bus stop. It was not a large thing, an umbrella. But it had reached something in the old woman that the galas and the honorary degrees never touched. Because it was real. Because the young woman had wanted nothing, had not known who Eugenia was, had simply been good to a stranger in the rain at her own expense, and Eugenia, who had spent her life teaching children to be exactly that kind of person, and had spent her recent decades surrounded by people who were exactly not, found herself, an old woman, unable to let it go. So she did a thing that the powerful almost never do. She decided to find the young woman and thank her properly. She had noticed the tote bag the young woman carried, a tote bag from a public school, the underfunded one across the city, and Eugenia Talbot, who still knew everyone in the education world of that city, made a call and described the young woman and asked who she might be. And the answer came back, "Oh, that sounds like Naima Wells. She's an aide over there. Sweet woman, raising twins on her own." And Eugenia, satisfied, was about to send a lovely note and a gift, when something nagged at her. The name, Wells, twins, and a cold feeling crept up the back of the old woman's neck, and she went, herself, to the admissions office of her own school and pulled the files from the most recent cycle. And there it was. Wells, Jalen, and Zuri. Denied 2 weeks ago. By her school. And her name. She stood there a long time in the fluorescent quiet of her own admissions office, holding the file, and the bottom dropped out of 50 years. She had ridden the bus to feel ordinary, and an ordinary young woman had been kind to her, and she had wanted, in her loneliness, simply to thank her, and the thread she had pulled to do it had unraveled all the way down to this. To a manila folder with her own institution's letterhead and 2 children's names, and the word denied, and the date, and Naima Wells listed as parent. The same Naima Wells who 2 weeks later would shelter the founder of this very school in the rain without the faintest idea that the kind soaked stranger held in her hands the power to close, or open, the door on everything that mother wanted in the world. The symmetry of it was so cruel and so perfect that Eugenia Talbot, who had not believed in much beyond hard work for a very long time, felt for a moment as though something larger than coincidence had reached into her comfortable, insulated life and turned it over to show her what was underneath. And what was underneath was not flattering. What was underneath was a woman who had let her life's work curdle into its own opposite, being handed, by the very person it had wronged, the unearned grace of a second chance to see. This is the part I most want you to sit with, so if you're not subscribed, do it now. Because what Eugenia Talbot did when she opened that file is the heart of everything. She read the file, and she read it the way she had not read an admissions file in years, not as a set of scores and boxes, but as a story. Because now she had a face to put at the center of it, the kind, soaked face of the young woman who had given her an umbrella in the rain. And what Eugenia Talbot read laid her low. She read the assessments of two clearly gifted children, the kind of raw, brilliant promise her school had been founded to find. She read the notes, the polite institutional notes that dinged the application for the things the poor cannot help, the gaps that come from an underfunded school, the lack of the expensive preparation the advantaged children arrive preloaded with, the absence of the connections and the polish that the process had quietly come to require. She read, in the cold language of her own admissions office, the exact machinery of exclusion that Miss Lillian had once stood between Eugenia and the machinery Eugenia had founded this entire school to defeat, now humming along efficiently inside the very institution that bore her name, turning away a brilliant poor child for precisely the reasons a brilliant poor child cannot help. And Eugenia Talbot, 80 years old, sat in her own admissions office and saw, for the first time with clear eyes, what her life's work had become. And she saw, in the file of a 6-year-old girl named Eugenia Wells, the poor brilliant girl she herself had once been, the girl Miss Lillian had refused to let the world turn away. And she understood that she had become, without ever meaning to, the very thing that had once tried to turn her away. The institution she built to be Miss Lillian had become the institution Miss Lillian fought, and a young mother whose children it had wrongly rejected had, 2 weeks later, not knowing any of it, stood in the rain and given Eugenia Talbot her umbrella. There was a photograph clipped to the file, the kind they took at the assessments, 2 solemn, beautiful children in their best clothes, a boy and a girl, holding hands the way twins do, looking into the camera with the open hope of children who do not yet know the verdict. And Eugenia Talbot looked at the little girl in the photograph, at Eugenia Wells, 6 years old. And she saw with a clarity that buckled her, herself. She saw the poor brilliant girl she had been, the one the world had every intention of turning away, the one a single stubborn teacher had saved. She saw the future this child would have if no Miss Lillian came, the slow dimming, the wasted fire, the genius poured out onto ground too poor to grow it, and she saw the future this child would have if someone fought, and she understood that she, Eugenia Talbot, was the only person in the world positioned at this exact moment to be the one who fought, that the universe or whatever it was had arranged things so that the founder herself was holding the file, and that there would be no excuse, ever, if she closed it and walked away. She had spent her whole life being grateful to Miss Lillian. She had never once, until that moment, holding a stranger's child's photograph in her own admissions office, understood that gratitude is not a feeling. Gratitude is a debt. And the only currency it can ever be paid in is becoming, for someone else, what was once done for you. It was almost more than the old woman could bear, the shape of it, the terrible grace of it. And Eugenia Talbot, who had spent 40 years giving speeches about her values, finally had to decide whether she actually had any. I want to step out of the story for a moment, because what happened to Naima's twins happens, quietly, to millions of children, and it is one of the great engines of inequality in this country, and we mostly do not look at it. We tell ourselves that America is a place where talent rises, where a brilliant poor child can make it on merit, and we point to the good schools as the proof, the ladders up. But we have built those ladders, more and more, to be climbed only by children who are already most of the way up. The application processes, the assessments, the unspoken requirements, the tutoring and the test prep and the connections, all of it quietly selects for advantage and calls the result merit, so that the schools that are supposed to be the great equalizers become, instead, the great sorting machines, confirming and concentrating the advantages children arrive with rather than overcoming them. A poor brilliant child and a wealthy average one apply to the same school, and far too often the wealthy average one gets in, and we tell ourselves a story about merit to avoid looking at what actually happened. Eugenia Talbot built a school to break that machine. She lived long enough to watch her school become it. That is not a story about one woman's failure. It is a story about how the most beautiful intentions in the world will drift, inexorably, toward serving the already served, unless someone with their eyes open fights, every single year, to drag them back. Miss Lillian fought. And then, for too long, nobody did. And I want to be precise about who pays for this, because it is not abstract. It is the specific child, the one with the fire in her, born to the family without the means, who applies to the good school in good faith and is turned away with a polite letter, and whose fire then has nowhere to burn but a school the country has decided to underfund, where heroic, exhausted teachers do their best with far too little, and the fire, more often than not, goes out, not because the child was not brilliant, but because brilliance is not enough, was never enough, in a country that pretends it is. We lose them by the millions, these children, and we lose what they would have invented and written and built and healed. And we tell ourselves it is sad but fair that the cream rises, when the truth is that we have rigged the rising. The cruelest lie we tell is the lie of merit, because it lets the advantaged believe they earned what they were given, and lets us look at the overlooked child and believe she simply did not have it. She had it. She has it. Eugenia Talbot had it. And the only reason the world ever found out was one teacher who refused to let the lie stand. The question is never whether the poor children have the fire. The question is only whether anyone will refuse, on their behalf, to let the door close. So now Eugenia Talbot had a decision to make. And the easy version of it, the version a lesser person would have chosen, was simply to fix this one case. Quietly admit the Wells twins, send their mother a warm letter, feel the warm glow of having done a good deed, and change nothing else. And Eugenia, to her great credit, understood that this would be the worst possible thing she could do. A salve on her own conscience that left the machine running for the next 1,000 children. So she did not do that. She did something much harder and much braver. And it started with her going, herself, to find Naima Wells. If you've made it this far with me, here at the part that matters most, then stay, because what these two women set right together is the thing this whole story was reaching for. She did not summon Naima to her grand office, because Eugenia understood, now, exactly the kind of power imbalance that office represented. She went to the underfunded school across the city, in the rain again, as it happened, and she found Naima Wells in a classroom full of other people's children, doing the underpaid sacred work. And she waited until the day was done, and then she introduced herself. And Naima, who did not recognize the well-dressed old woman, went pale when she heard the name, Eugenia Talbot, of Talbot Academy. Because Naima knew exactly who that was. And her first thought, her heartbreaking first thought, was that she had done something wrong, that she was in some kind of trouble. And Eugenia Talbot, an institution, one of the most powerful figures in the city, stood in a shabby public school classroom and said to a teacher's aide, "Mrs. Wells, 2 weeks ago you stood in the rain and gave me your umbrella. And you had no idea who I was, and you have no idea what you did." She watched the young woman's face work through it, the confusion first, then the slow dawning. The memory of the soaked old stranger at the bus stopped rearranging itself around the name she had just heard. The name that had been on the letter, the name on the side of the building she had prayed toward for a year. Naima's hand went to her mouth. "You," she said. "That was you." And Eugenia nodded and let the silence sit, because some things have to be felt before they can be said. And she watched a year of heartbreak, and 2 weeks of rain, and one impulsive act of kindness collide behind the young woman's eyes. And she understood that whatever she said next would matter more than almost anything she had said in 80 years. And so she chose it with the care of a woman who had spent her whole life choosing words for children, and what she chose was the truth. All of it, without a single shield in front of it. And then she told her. She told Naima that she was the woman from the bus stop. She watched the recognition and the confusion cross Naima's tired face. And then Eugenia Talbot did the thing that tells you who she truly was underneath 40 years of drift. She did not offer Naima a favor. She apologized. "I run the school that rejected your children," she said. "I have read their file. They should never have been turned away. They are exactly the children my school exists to serve, and my school failed them, and failed its own purpose, and failed me, and that is my fault. Because it is my school and my name, and I stopped paying attention. I did not come here to do you a kindness, Mrs. Wells. I came here because you did me one, and it woke me up. And now I have to do something much bigger than thank you. I have to fix what I built." It is a rare thing to watch a powerful person apologize without a single qualification, without an excuse, without quietly making themselves the hero of their own contrition. And Eugenia Talbot did it the hard, clean way. She did not say mistakes were made. She said, "I made them." She did not say the process failed your children. She said, "I built the process, and it failed your children. And it has been failing children like yours for years, while I gave speeches about doing the opposite, and I did not see it because I did not want to see it, because seeing it would have asked something of me, and I was old and comfortable and tired." She stood in that shabby classroom in her fine coat, and she gave a teacher's aide the kind of full, unflinching apology that most people cannot manage to give the people closest to them. And she did it because she realized, standing there, that she owed this young woman not just the apology for the school, but a kind of reverence for the umbrella, for the lesson the umbrella had taught her. The lesson she had supposedly built her whole life around and had to be reminded of, at 80, by a stranger in the rain. "You taught me something 2 weeks ago," Eugenia said, "and I have been teaching for 60 years. That is not a thing I say lightly. You reminded me what I was for." Naima Wells, who had braced herself for almost anything except this, stood in her empty classroom and listened to one of the most powerful women in the city apologize to her, and she did the thing that, again, tells you exactly who she was. She did not grovel, and she did not grab. The proud part of her, the part her mother had raised, rose up, and she said, "Mrs. Talbot, I appreciate that, I do, but I didn't give you that umbrella to get my kids into your school. I didn't even know who you were. And I don't want my babies getting in because I happened to do you a favor in the rain. They deserve to get in because they're good enough, and they are, and if your school can't see that without me handing you an umbrella, then maybe it isn't the school I thought it was." And Eugenia Talbot, hearing that, the pride in the principle and the refusal to be made a charity case, loved that young woman completely, because it was the exact thing she herself would have said, the exact thing Miss Lillian had seen in her 80 years before. And she said, "Mrs. Wells, you are entirely right, and that is exactly why this cannot be a favor. Your children are getting in because they are good enough, because they were always good enough, because they met the only standard that was ever supposed to matter, and my school lost sight of it. I am not bending the rules for you. I am fixing the rules so they finally see children like yours. There is a difference, and I need you to let me show you what it is." And Naima, listening, felt something complicated move through her, because the proud part of her was satisfied, yes, But underneath the pride was something her mother had taught her too, which was how to receive. Marcella had always said that pride that will not let anyone help you is just vanity wearing a work shirt, that there is a grace in giving and a grace in accepting, and a whole person needs both. So Naima did not refuse out of pride, the way a smaller person might have, just to prove she could. She listened to the difference Eugenia was drawing between a favor and a correction, between being let in as an exception and being seen because the standard had finally been fixed to see her, and she understood that it was a real difference, and that accepting this was not taking charity, it was letting a wrong be made right, which is a different thing entirely, and which a person is allowed, even obligated, to accept. So she said, at last, "All right. Show me." And something passed between the two women in that empty classroom, the old educator and the young the one at the end of her work and the one who did not yet know she was at the beginning of hers. A recognition, a handing over, though neither of them could have named it yet. What Eugenia Talbot did over the following year, she did with the ferocity of an old woman who has realized she does not have many years left to set things right. The twins, of course, were admitted on full scholarship, not as a favor but as a correction, and Jalen and Zuri Wells walked through the doors of Talbot Preparatory Academy that fall. Two brilliant 6-year-olds, finally given the future their gifts deserved. Within a single semester, the teachers were sending notes home. Not the kind Naima was used to, but the kind that said, "Your son asked a question today that I have been thinking about all evening." The kind that said, "Your daughter is the most alive mind in my classroom." The twins bloomed in soil that could finally feed them, the way Naima had always known they would, the way every parent of an overlooked child knows in their bones their child would. If only, if only. And every report card, every science fair ribbon, every part in the school play was also a quiet indictment of how close the world had come to throwing all of it away, and a quiet vindication of the mother who had refused to let it. Naima kept that first denial letter, all those years. She did not keep it out of bitterness. She kept it to remember how thin the line had been, how close her babies had come to never being seen, and to make sure that in whatever power she one day came to hold, no other mother would ever have to get that lucky to have her children seen for what they were. But that was the smallest part of what Eugenia did, and she would have been ashamed if it had been the largest. Because she went to war in her 80th year with the institution she had built, and she dragged it back, by force of will and the unimpeachable authority of being its founder, toward the purpose it had abandoned. She tore the admissions process apart and rebuilt it, stripping out the quiet machinery that selected for advantage, building in the active search for exactly the overlooked promise her school had been created to find. She established a true scholarship endowment, real money, enough to make the school genuinely accessible to the families it had been pricing out, and she went and raised more of it from every wealthy alum and board member she had spent decades being polite to, calling in 40 years of favors all at once. And she reinstated, as more than a speech, the founding promise, made it operational, made it the standard everyone in that building answered to. No child who belongs here gets turned away for what they can't help. She had said those words for 40 years. Now, at the very end, she made them true again. It was not easy, and it was not popular, and Eugenia did not care. There were board members who had grown comfortable with what the school had become, who liked the rankings and the prestige and the particular families those things attracted, and who suggested, gently, that perhaps the founder, in her advanced years, was being sentimental, was risking the institution's hard-won, standing over a personal feeling. And Eugenia Talbot, who had spent decades being gracious, stopped being gracious. She reminded them, in language that left no room, whose name was on the building, and whose vision they were the temporary stewards of, and what that vision had actually been, in writing. From the very first day, she reminded them that a school that serves only the children who need it least is not a great school. It is an expensive sorting service with a chapel, and that she had not given her life to build an expensive sorting service. She was old, and she was the founder, and she was right, and she knew how to use all three, and one by one the obstacles gave way, because there is a particular force to an old person who has decided, with the time they have left, to make a wrong thing right, and will not be managed, and cannot be waited out, because they are done waiting. By the end of that year, the machine was rebuilt. By the end of that year, the door was a door again. And on a bright morning that fall, Naima Wells walked her twins up the long stone path to the grand entrance of Talbot Preparatory Academy. Jalen solemn in his new uniform, and Zuri practically vibrating in hers, just as she had vibrated at the assessment. And Naima stood at the bottom of the steps and watched her two brilliant children walk through the doors that had been closed to them, into the future their gifts deserved, and she had to put her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound, because she had fought so long and hoped so carefully and lost, and here, by a road no one could ever have drawn, was the thing she had not let herself believe in, made real. The twins turned at the top of the steps and waved at her, unafraid, already belonging, and Naima waved back and let the tears come now that they could not see her face clearly enough to worry. And somewhere behind a tall window, an old woman watched the same scene and felt, for the first time in many years, that her life's work and her life itself had been worth the cost. And she did one more thing, the thing that mattered most to her personally, the thing that closed the circle. She did not just bring the Wells children into the school. She brought Naima, because Eugenia Talbot, talking with that young woman, had recognized something beyond kindness, had recognized a born educator, a woman doing the sacred work for poverty wages in an underfunded school because she loved it. A woman exactly like the young Eugenia, exactly like Miss Lillian. And Eugenia Talbot offered Naima Wells a real job at Talbot, a real salary, a real future. And more than that, she took Naima under her wing in the time she had left, mentored her, began to groom her, an old educator pouring everything she knew into a young one, and made it quietly clear to her board that this young woman was someone to watch, someone to develop, someone who understood in her bones the thing the school had forgotten and would need, after Eugenia was gone, to keep from forgetting again. The umbrella Naima gave in the rain did not just open a door for her children. It opened one for her. In the few years Eugenia Talbot had left, she poured into Naima Wells everything 60 years of teaching had taught her, the way Miss Lillian had once poured into her, and Naima drank it in, because she had been born for this work and had only ever lacked the door. The old woman taught her how a school is actually run, and what it is actually for, and how the second is forgotten in the doing of the first, and how to fight that forgetting. She taught her the history of the place, and the meaning of the motto and the name of Miss Lillian, so that the chain would have its full memory in someone after Eugenia was gone. And she told Naima, more than once, near the end, that of all the things she had built in a long and storied life, the proudest was not the school's rankings or its famous graduates or its grand buildings, but the fact that, at the very end, with the time she had left, she had been given the chance to make it true again, and that the chance had come to her, of all the ways it could have come, soaked, at a bus stop, in the form of a young woman with one umbrella who did not know who she was. If you're still with me here at the end, then stay, because what grew out of one umbrella is the thing this whole story was reaching toward. Years later, Jalen and Zuri Wells were thriving at Talbot, two of the brightest students in the school, exactly the children it had been built for. And they were not alone, because the school around them had changed, had filled back up with the rough, brilliant, overlooked children it had once turned away. The admissions reformed, the scholarships flowing, the founding promise made flesh again. Naima would learn their names in the years that followed, the new children, the ones who came in on the reformed admissions and the real scholarships, and she would see in face after face the same thing Eugenia had seen in Zuri, the fire that the old machine would have turned away, now given somewhere to burn. There was the boy from her own old neighborhood whose mother cleaned offices at night, who would grow up to be an engineer. There was the girl who had taught herself to read from cereal boxes, who argued like a future lawyer at 9 and would become exactly that. There was the quiet one, like Jalen, who saw the shape of problems before anyone else did. Every one of them was a child the school, 2 years before, would have sorted out with a polite letter, and every one of them was now a child the school had been built all along to save. That was the real restitution, the one that mattered more than any single family's good fortune, the hundreds of fires the reformed door would let in over the years to come, each one a small refusal of the lie that the cream simply rises, each one a quiet proof that it does not rise on its own, that it has to be lifted, and that lifting it is the only work a school like that was ever for. Naima Wells had risen at that school from aide to teacher to, in time, an administrator, learning at the elbow of the legend who had found her in the rain, and when Eugenia Talbot finally passed, full of years, it surprised no one who knew the story that it was Naima Wells the old woman had been quietly preparing, for years, to carry the founding promise forward, to be the one who stood. Every admissions season, between the school and the machinery of advantage, and said, the way Miss Lillian had once said, the way Eugenia had said, this child belongs, and we will not turn her away for what she cannot help. The line that ran from Miss Lillian to Eugenia Talbot did not end with Eugenia. It ran on, through an umbrella in the rain, to a single mother who had given it away expecting nothing, and through her into the future, into every overlooked child she would spend the rest of her life refusing to let the world turn away. It is the kind of ending that almost did not happen, and that is the part I never want you to forget. It hung, the whole thing, on an umbrella, on a single afternoon, on a young woman tired and broke in freshly wronged choosing, in the rain, to be exactly who her mother had raised her to be. Pull that one thread, and the whole tapestry comes apart. The twins stay in the failing school and their fire slowly gutters. Naima stays in aid her whole life, undervalued, unseen. The school goes on quietly betraying its purpose for another generation, turning away the next 1,000 Zuras, and Eugenia Talbot dies revered and comfortable, never once forced to see what she had let her life's work become. All of it, the rescue and the reckoning and the restoration, hung on a piece of kindness given to a person who could do nothing in return. That is either the most fragile thing in the world or the strongest, and I have gone back and forth on which, and I have decided it is both, and that the only sane response to living in a world where everything good hangs on threads that thin is to be, yourself, one of the people who keeps tying them. I want to tell you something, here at the end. The miracle in this story is real, but I do not want you to take the wrong miracle from it. The wrong miracle is the umbrella, the lucky coincidence, the idea that if you are just good enough to strangers, the universe will reward you by happening to place a powerful one in your path on a rainy day. That is not the lesson, because that is a lottery, and the overwhelming majority of brilliant poor children whose applications are quietly denied will never give an umbrella to the founder of the school, and their genius will be lost the way Eugenia's nearly was, and the way millions truly are, and no story will be told about them. The real miracle in this story is not the umbrella. It is Naima, in the rain, broke and heartbroken and freshly rejected, giving away the only umbrella she had to a stranger who could do nothing for her, because that was simply who she had decided to be. That kindness was complete in itself, before any reward, and it would have been exactly as beautiful if the old woman had been nobody at all and Naima had simply gotten wet and gone home. The umbrella did not become meaningful because the woman turned out to be powerful. It was meaningful because of who Naima was when she thought the woman was nobody. And the second real thing, the thing I most want the powerful among you to hear, is Eugenia choosing, at 80, to look clearly at what her own life's work had become, and to spend her last strength dragging it back to its purpose. Most institutions never get their Eugenia. Most never look. The question this story actually asks is not whether you will be lucky enough to give your umbrella to the right person. It is whether you will give it away when you are sure the person is nobody, and whether, if you are ever the one running the school, you will be brave enough to find out who you have been turning away. So let me leave you with a question tonight. When was the last time you were kind to someone who could do absolutely nothing for you, and never found out their name, and never got a thing in return? That is the only kind that counts. The kind Naima's mother named. And I want to hear about yours. And if you have ever been turned away from a door you belonged behind, told you weren't good enough when the truth was you just weren't advantaged enough, tell me that too, because you were not the one who failed that day. Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and it always means more than you know. And one real thing before I go. If you are a parent fighting for your child's education against a system that keeps closing doors, please hear me. A single admissions decision does not measure your child, and it does not decide their future, no matter how final it feels. There are more doors than the one that closed. You can dial 211 from almost anywhere in the United States to be connected to educational resources, tutoring, after-school and enrichment programs, and family support in your area, much of it free. And your local public library remains one of the most powerful and underused engines of a child's future that exists. Keep fighting for them. Your belief in your child is worth more than any school's letter, and the world is full of Miss Lillians if you keep looking, and you can be one too. If this story stayed with you, share it with a parent who is fighting for their kids, or a teacher who fights for other people's. Subscribe for a new story every week. And the next time it's raining and somebody's getting soaked, remember Naima Wells and give away your umbrella, expecting nothing, because that is the only kind of kindness that counts, and because you truly never know who is standing in the rain. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next one.